Let's talk about the last Chiron and Taurus period. Chiron and Taurus is about addressing vulnerabilities related to value, worth, dignity, stability, security. Chiron and Taurus can expose vulnerabilities around self worth and self esteem, money, income, and material security, access to resources, the body and physical well being, dignity, and the feeling of being valued by others, scarcity, deprivation, and fears of loss, as well as the ability to trust that one's needs will be met. Notable world events from the last Chiron and Taurus period, which was from 1976 to 1984, include, of course, the Soweto uprising that we spoke about in the last video. There was also the inflation crisis in the late 1970s, where many countries were dealing with severe inflation after the oil shocks of the 1970s. People's purchasing power was being eroded, wages struggled to keep up with prices, and basic material security was a major concern. Countries around the world were wrestling with inflation, rising food and energy costs, and questions of economic security. Does that sound familiar? In 1979, inflation was over 13% in the UK and in South Africa, 11% in the US, nearly 15% in Italy, and almost 20% in countries like Greece, Mexico, and South Korea, while Portugal, Chile, and Turkey were above 20%. And then, of course, there was the Iranian Revolution that rejected foreign influence and overturned the political order that was established after the coup. During the Chiron and Taurus period, the consequences of those resource and sovereignty disputes reshaped the region. The revolution dramatically altered global oil markets and triggered another energy crisis. The last time Chiron was in Taurus, the Iranian Revolution transformed one of America's closest allies into one of its greatest adversaries. Nearly 50 years later, Iran and the US remain locked in conflict. Different circumstances, but many of the same underlying questions about resources, sovereignty, power, and who controls them. Then from 1979 to 1982, there was a global recession. Many countries experienced rising unemployment and economic hardship. Questions about jobs, wages, and economic security dominated political discussions. In the US, the recession of 1981 to 1982 pushed unemployment to 10.8%, the highest level in the post war era at that time. Manufacturing, construction, and the auto industry were particularly hard hit, with millions losing jobs. This is interesting considering we are in the era of AI, where there's been lots of warnings about how many people could potentially lose their jobs because of the rise and adoption of AI. The UK entered a severe recession from 1980s to 1981. Inflation had reached double digits, output fell, unemployment surged above 3 million, manufacturing regions experienced significant job losses. By the end of 1981, unemployment across Western Europe had exceeded 10 million people. Economic growth stalled while governments struggled with inflation, energy costs, and labor unrest. In 1982, Mexico announced it could no longer service its foreign debt, and that triggered the Latin American debt crisis. That resulted in widespread recession, rising unemployment, falling wages, and what became known as Latin America's lost decade. Chile experienced a major financial crisis in 1982. External debt ballooned, incomes fell, unemployment surged, and wages failed to keep up with inflation. So it is quite clear that the last time Chiron was in Taurus, much of the world was wrestling with material security. Given where the world is in 2026, the housing affordability crises, rising food costs, rising oil costs, economic inequality, debates over resources, and growing concerns about financial security, the symbolism is hard to miss. The collective conversation appears to be moving toward many of the same questions, even if the circumstances are very different.